What happens when you let the external imbalance the internal versus the internal balancing the external? Welcome to another episode of Social Science Club. I'm Toussaint Morrison. Thank you so much for tuning in. We're going to get into non-response or non-reaction. And you can really word this however you want, but we'll essentially go with outside in to inside out. And I've been watching a lot of videos on this, and I wanted to make one myself just to give you some tools on how to actually do this, because a lot of folks will tell you what to do, but not how to do it. And I just hope I can give you some real life examples that can maybe give you an idea of how to do it. Because once we start implementing or plugging in new tools, it's wild. Everything just starts to like click, click, clack together. And it'll essentially set you up for a new frequency, a new vibration, a new sensation, if I'm quoting the 80s song. But here's where we'll start. We'll start with essentially you getting rattled by something happening on the outside of you. Now, the first thing I want you to understand is that this happens to everybody. This is not new. This is not supernatural. This is not bad. This is not a horrible thing. This is perfectly normal and natural for this to happen. And it's going to happen all the time. I remember Bill Hader talking about anxiety being like a little character on his shoulder. And he really didn't recognize it and speak to it until he was 38, or so he said in this video. And once he was able to recognize it, he would say, "Oh, look, anxiety's here. Check that out." Quote, Inside Out 2. And he said, "I don't try to tell the anxiety to go away because I know that it's there. Trying to make it go away is going to make it probably worse. But all I say to it is, oh, thanks for coming. Thanks for showing up. You can stick around for a little bit, but then like an hour or so, or maybe 10 minutes, you'll have to go, depending on the circumstances here." And that's the same thing with letting the external rattle the internal. I want you to take that as perfectly okay for that to happen, but how will you deal with it going forward so it doesn't entirely change the internal? So when I was younger in high school, I had a lot of doomsday prophecies in my head, how things would go. I would play a football game for the high school and be like, "Oh man, I can tell you how this is going to happen. It's going to be bad." Or I would say something is going to be not go right. Or I would always prepare for the worst and not really hope at all. And I remember one time I was having a really tough day. I had this just maniacal, intrusive thought. And I was a junior, I believe. I was a junior at the time. And I had to walk out. And this was after I had gone to counseling at the school and basically been branded as a highly sensitive person, which is totally fine. I just didn't know that about myself or didn't even want to come to terms with it. And I took myself out of school and I walked from Minneapolis South High, I think about a block or two. Yep, 2 blocks to Corcoran Park. And it's a park right next to the school. It's not a fantastic or fancy park at all. It's probably one of those plain parks you'll ever see in your life. You ever come to Minneapolis, go to Corcoran Park. And I sat down on a bench and I just wept. I wept and wept and wept because I wasn't in control. I couldn't get a hold on the handlebars of this bicycle, that were my emotions. And I just let it all friggin' go. I just let it go. I said, I just have to accept this. I feel deeply. I am feeling deeply at the moment. And I couldn't like white knuckle it anymore. So I let it go. And I sat with it for probably another half hour. I believe I wrote down in a journal what I was feeling. And I was like, this is an awful feeling. I feel like the worst is going to happen. The worst is going to happen. And then I stared at that page for a little bit. And I got up, I walked back to school, and the day went immensely better than it had started out. Now, this is an example of meditation, journaling, reflection, and grace. All those things at once. I was doing all those things at once and I didn't know I was doing it. There are some times that you have to release tears. You have to cry about it. You have to engage with it in whatever way that you feel it's trying to engage with you. We watched Inside Out 2 with a friend of mine, and one of the things in Inside Out 2, spoiler alert, the emotions try to take all the bad memories and put them in the back. Put those bad memories in the back and put them away and basically just press them down. Now, when you try to just suppress emotions, guess what's going to happen? They're going to bounce back, not even twice, not even 3 times, not even 4 times. They bounce back so much stronger than you can imagine that they initially were. If you don't deal with it, it will deal with you. I talked about PTSD once, and somebody came back from a war. He said that he hadn't really felt anything. It was totally fine. He said, I'm fine. And then about, I think, 30 or 40 years in, to him, inexplicably, no reason, began weeping at a gas station. Just tears. He had bottled everything down for so long that he couldn't understand why it was even surfacing or where it was surfacing from or what it even was. This man had been a soldier in war, had not dealt with it, and then all of a sudden it came to the surface. This is a force of nature. I always quote the one of the scenes in The Wire. I never really watched The Wire, but there was a scene where the chief of police thought that he could just limit all of the drug dealing and all the drug usage to one block. And he said, I'm just going to put it all there. Everything's going to be fine. And then all of a sudden, really wild stuff starts to happen that he didn't plan for, that he didn't think would happen. And this community organizer comes up to him and he says, brother, these are drugs. You can't control this. It's a force of nature. And I was like, oh, wow, it's a force of nature. You can't control it. And you can apply that to a lot of things. And when we talk about emotions, when we talk about external reality making you feel a certain way, these are forces of nature that you have to give grace to. You have to respect them. Otherwise, if you don't respect them, they will deal with you. And when we talk about the external imbalancing the internal, this can be something that goes on not for a day, not for a week, not for a month, not for a season. It can go on for a lifetime. There are people that have held grudges, people that have held onto a story that happened to them. And this is of no blame or indictment to these people. It is something that happens, and it's something that can happen. You have to understand that the capacity that you have as a human, we experiencing different frequencies and energies and all these things at the same time, this can absolutely happen to you. And it will behoove you to understand that you're vulnerable to it and you can do something about it. Now, here comes the other half of this video. When we talk about the internal balancing the external, what I mean is I walk out of my apartment every now and then, and I just have a loose grip on my keys sometimes. I have these keys, and dropped them. I'll drop them every often, like maybe once every 2 or 3 days, which seems a lot. And I will essentially, depending on how the day is going, sometimes I'll drop the keys and I'll think, oh, there it goes. There it goes. Yep, that's it. That's it. And that's not it, really. And so what happens is I end up going into a place of letting the external imbalance the internal. So when I drop the keys now, what I do is I look at the keys and I go, and I pick them up. And then I keep walking forward. What I'm doing in that moment is literally kind of the same thing I did as a high schooler at Corcoran Park. I wrote my feelings down. I looked at them some more. And I said, okay. And I got up and I went back. And in doing that, it neutralizes what's happening. So I let what's going on in here dictate how I respond out here. Now, we can call it taking the external to imbalance the internal, reacting. And we can call taking the internal, balancing the external, responding. However we want to, whatever we want to call it, the idea is how can you get your internal frequency to neutralize what's happening outside of you? How can you not just be okay with what's happening outside of you, but be neutral with it? And you're going to find that it's a lot easier to get to a positive place or an optimistic place or even a place of growth and expansion from neutral, as opposed to going from F it to expansion and growth. How can you get to a stillness? How can you get to a place of alignment, or as Abraham Hicks would say, the vortex? How could you get into that space where there are all possibilities and you're not really mourning the grave or celebrating the day, but you're in a place where you're willing to accept what's happening outside of you, and that you also have the power to work through it and go towards the thing that you want, your desired reality? Because all these videos are really about is desired reality, your desired reality. And how do you get there? People will let their desired reality haunt them sometimes. And that can turn into the thing that we talked about a little earlier, which is essentially holding on to an external reality thing that happened, a story, and then letting it entirely just fork in the road away from your desired reality. And you spend maybe a lifetime, a month, a week, or a day, or even an hour feeling like you're in a plane looking outside at that desired reality, floating away from it. And the idea is that you want to understand that your desired reality is just that, your desired reality. You came up with it. And we can get into that a little bit, later with Neville Goddard and Earl Nightingale, with the idea that because you desire it, it can be yours, and it already is yours. But let's back up the truck a little bit. The idea that the external reality can imbalance your internal reality, you have to understand that when you get to that space, you have to first recognize it. First, just be aware of it. We talked about this in the past video. You can look at the past video, the 3 ways to not unknowingly sabotage your unmet potential. Oh my God, how did I remember that? But you have to be aware of it. You have to be aware that your external reality is imbalancing your internal reality. And then from there, we want to then look at our external reality and neutralize it. Because, Wayne Dyer, when we change the way we look at everything, everything changes. In the comments below, let's just do a think tank on this. What are some ways or means or tools that you have that neutralize your external reality, or at least neutralize your lens upon it, or bring you to a stillness? We talk about meditation, we talk about journaling, we talk about essentially just sitting down and just being patient with it, sitting with it. I believe one of the terms was lean into it. And what are those things for you that you do? All right. Thank you so much for tuning in. I appreciate you being here. I know these long form videos have taken like a journey, and I'm finding my voice in it. I always will be. But I want to help you get to the place that you want to get to. And the best way that I find to do that is to give you the tools that people have used to heighten their frequency, and also with story. I'm a storyteller. What can I say? Hey, we'll see you in the next video.